Welcome everybody to today's webinar, um, which is Music Audiology, Specialized Care for Specialized Ears with Dr. Frank Wartinger. Dr. Wartinger is the founder of Earmark Hearing Conservation and the Philadelphia Musicians Clinic. He serves as a CAOHC course director, represents the American Academy of Audiology on Council for Accreditation and Occupational Hearing Conservation, and teaches as an adjunct faculty at Drexel University and Wayne State University. He has also co-authored the Academy's 2020 Clinical Consensus document on audiological services for musicians. And with his background as a musician, producer, and engineer, he brings a unique perspective to hearing conservation and care. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Frank Wartinger. And the only other thing I want to say before we do
Mhm.
is please put any questions in the chat and we'll address them as we can.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shelley. Thanks for setting this all up. I know it was rather quick and short notice, and thanks everybody for joining and spending your lunch hour with me. Feel free to eat your food. Feel free to stay off camera. I know that it's kind of awkward this time of the day. I will also say just up front, I do have a sinus infection today, so my voice is a bit grating. I apologize for that. Imagine how I'm hearing it, right? But also, if I do kick into some kind of kicking and screaming and coughing and sneezing attack, I will try to mute those. If I don't catch them, just remember you are on my side. We're trying to get through this hour together in a positive way, so we'll get through it. This specific webinar is going to be about this tiny subspecialty that we call music audiology. A relatively new term, but not a new subspecialty, obviously. But depending on where you're coming in from with this topic, I'm hoping that you can take away a couple different things that I'm going to try to present here. First, we're going to be spending some time talking about who is the musicians. Great sentence, Frank. And who are these music industry professionals that we're going to be talking about? If you're a clinical audiologist, you're working in private practice or medical settings, I'm hoping that you can take away some additional best practice recommendations for using whenever a musician walks in through the door or calls for an appointment, particularly around fitting and verification of earplugs and in-ear monitors. Um, if you're in education or research, hopefully you'll see that there's some space for some further knowledge and further basic sciences, building up that knowledge base and training our students, making sure that they are ready for this particular population that comes through. If you're seeing a good number of musicians already and you want to increase the efficacy of your care and the quality of your word of mouth referrals, because that's how you get all your patients, all right. We'll go through some of the kind of quirkier aspects of this subspecialty. I'll be sharing my experience with mobile care and telehealth and other means of increasing accessibility, ways that you can make your office and your services more accessible and more welcoming for this particular population. By last count, there's about 20 or so audiologists across the country who exclusively or primarily work in the music industry. I know of another 20 or 30 who consider this a major part of their practice. So just like any specialty like cochlear implants or medical pediatrics or APD, it is wise advice from wiser people than I to discourage dabbling in this. That said, just like any other population, musicians exist everywhere. I don't know if it's something in the water, but there are musicians everywhere. There's people buying guitars constantly and learning and enjoying and making art with sound, right? It's fun. Why not? But wherever they are, they need quality care. So that's why I spend a lot of time with AAA and ADA and NHCA doing these kind of educational outreaches to make sure that every audiologist everywhere feels really confident and comfortable when a musician calls or walks in through the door. At the end of this talk, we'll be talking about some referral networks. There's some recent newcomers that are available as far as global initiatives to help out with this population. So I want to make you aware of that as well. Um, so when I do give these talks at big conferences, I hear from a lot of audiologists afterwards that it's a polarizing population, musicians. And generally speaking, we have people who fit in one of the two camps. Either this is your favorite people, right? When a musician comes in or calls, you get excited. You're enthused to spend that hour with them and dive deep into their nuanced complaints and concerns and really help them. Then I see the other end where folks say, "Ah, boy, this population really takes my time. They really challenge me. I don't enjoy it. And if that's the case, either way, I think there's something for this next hour for you. Personally, I'm the former. My past life before audiology was as a professional sound engineer in studio and live sound. So I really do see musicians as kind of my people. Currently, my practice is about 50% professional touring, recording performers and engineers and that staff. We'll get into who in a second. And the other half are mostly music students, music lovers, audiophiles, if you will, people who just really engage and care about sound. So who are we going to be speaking about? I typically say musicians, but musicians is a really wide net. It's a big mouthful though to say music and entertainment industry profession. That was one. I caught it. Mute. Music and entertainment industry professionals. So we're just going to say musicians, right? When we say musicians, we're talking about professional performers, dancers, actors, anybody on a stage, and we're talking about the consumer level, right? The amateur level, the students, the people who are working towards this or are doing this in their free time. They have really the same exposures, but they typically have less resources, less experience, less training. So in some ways, they're actually at equal or more risk. But it's not just the people on the stage. The people on the stage is 1% of the music industry. The people who really need care are very often the people behind stage who don't have the same resources and don't have the limelight on them and the same drive to be motivated to care about this. So we have sound engineers, those are people who actually make the sound like it does. The production crew, people actually setting up the stages, studio staff, tour staff, those who are driving, setting up stages, setting up instruments, the venue staff, everybody at every club across the entire country is exposed to concerts every single night, and they need just as much care. Bar staff, front of house, bouncers, everybody. And of course, broadcasters, radio, hosts, producers, all of them, they're all exposed to the same stuff. So when we say musicians for the rest of the hour and the rest of my life, this is what I'm speaking about. I'm speaking about all of these people. Okay. No matter an individual's role, there are some things that all musicians have in common. And the biggest one here is that music is a unique noise. I don't hear an industrial worker saying that they love the sound of their jackhammer or a miner saying that they love the sound of their mining equipment. But the sound that comes out of the tools that musicians make is art, right? It's the goal. It's the thing that they chose to create. It's not noise. It's not a byproduct. It's the desired effect. Even the support staff in venues and tours, they often cite the proximity to hearing positive artistic expression as a huge draw and a perk to what they do. I work in the industry because I get to be close to art every single night, and that is not ignore something we should ignore, right? I'm hearing a beep beep, and I don't know what that is. Oh, it's people in the waiting room. Okay, not a problem. Um, so music is both work and play. It's both vocation and avocation for everybody in the industry. It's also very tied to one's sense of identity and purpose and self-worth. People saying things like, I am a singer, I am a hip hop record producer. And that is very huge in their life as far as who they are and what they are, right? Welcome for joining. If you don't want to have your camera on, you don't need to. Up to you. Uh, some additional things here. The industry itself is rather competitive. There are fewer, by last count, orchestra seats available for musicians than there are seats or openings in the Olympics for athletes. So it is more competitive of a field than even like Olympic level athletic uh, activity. Um, that means that people are vying for the same positions, and these skills that they develop are extremely specialized. I'm going to continue that kind of analogy here about pro athletes. You know, the specialized skills that musicians develop from a very early age, it takes a lot of resources. Very often, musicians don't have the time to work up other life skills. Rarely have I met world-class musicians who have some backup career or some job waiting in the wings outside of music. This is all they have. All their eggs went into this one basket. So that I think lines up a lot with these pro athletes. And then think of these pro athletes who then get an injury. What are you going to do afterwards, right? When your performance starts wavering, what is your backup plan? And in many, many cases, they don't have that. Another big thing to keep in mind when working with anybody in the music industry is that their focus is on their performance, right? Their focus is on the performance. That means our focus as their care providers also needs to be on their performance, right? Any compromise that we present, any option treatment that we present that can compromise their performance will often be not accepted. It's going to be a barrier to that intervention. Now, just to overuse a PowerPoint animation there, we can't really address any of these bigger issues if we don't acknowledge the practical barriers that a lot of musicians have when seeking and receiving our traditional audiologic services, right? Most music industry professionals, this is a true statement and it's frustrating, go without basic audiologic care for years, decades, even their full careers. I've seen folks who have recently retired from the music industry who tell me they have never had a hearing test or audiologic review, and that is frustrating. One reason for that, inconsistent insurance coverage. Very often, musicians are freelancers, so they're only getting insurance coverage through their employer when they're employed with a certain production or a certain tour. And in between those, they're on their own. So they're a little bit up in the air regarding this. Additionally, they have non-traditional schedules, very travel-heavy schedules, which can make it really tough if to keep those appointments, especially if our office hours are only during hours when they typically sleep, right? If you work nights and you get home at 4 a.m. and our office opening is only, we only have an appointment open at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m., they're not going to arrive, right? They're not going to make it there. And that's not their fault. That's their specific work schedule. On top of that, typically when they do make it in through our doors, and this isn't criticizing any of us, but in truth, they typically have these nuanced auditory complaints, these things that we typically call subclinical, right? They walk in, they do a full hearing test, everything looks normal on the graph, and we say you're normal. That can erode trust because these subclinical complaints are very real to them and they can often feel dismissed. I hear a lot of musicians say that they feel like they weren't listened to when they went to see an audiologist. And it's simply that our tests are not sensitive enough to catalog the issues that these expert listeners have. And I'm going to continue the athlete analogy for a third time. If anybody knows me, you know that this is foolhardy of me because I am not an athlete and I know nothing about sports. But the athlete analogy, I think, really works here, which is that if you have a world-class sprinter, let's say, and they lose a couple seconds of their 500-meter time from one year to the next, that could be a big issue for them. Their career can be impacted by that. Let's say it's a minor joint issue. But if they go in and see a generalized PT and get a generalized assessment of their range of motion, guess what? They're going to look at them and say, you're more in shape than 99% of the people that come in here. You can run 500 meters. Wow, amazing. So the slight differences that mean the world to their career, right? They might lose back to the musician. They might lose that orchestra seat if they can't quite perform the same way that they used to or can't quite hear the same way that they used to. But on our audiogram, it looks normal. So we say, what? You have normal hearing. And they say, I know the difference. Things have changed. So we talk about noise-induced hearing disorders a lot, right? This is a uh, intermediate level webinar, so I can assume a lot of knowledge about these different conditions. But when we talk in music audiology about these disorders, we typically just relabel them as music-induced hearing disorders. Why? Because it's music that is the cause and not, quote, noise. Back to what I said about art versus unwanted sound. So we're going to instead focus on the vocational impacts of these disorders to see how we can address them best. For hearing loss, obviously you are not hearing everything that you could be hearing, especially some nuances. And the biggest problem here is that for the musician, it really erodes their trust, their sense of agency and control and feeling that their hearing is going to carry them through and allow them to hear every nuance that they need to be able to hear. It also reduces their enjoyment, right? Music doesn't sound as good through amplification. Music doesn't sound as good through hearing loss, and that can detract the joy of their work as well. Hyperacusis, as we all know, can be upsetting for anybody. For anybody who works in a loud space, it's even worse. And unfortunately, every music setting, every music production and music performance setting is loud. Even playing piano in a quiet practice room by yourself can be unbearable for someone with severe hyperacusis. So I work with a lot of folks with hyperacusis to pull back the fear and the avoidance to allow them to reconnect to their art, um, and reconnect to really their identity, because not being able to play music for a period of time, even for a couple months or even for a year, for a musician, what are you anymore if you can't play music? And that is really, really stressful for musicians. It can be a mental health issue as well. So I always refer out for mental health in these cases. I skipped tinnitus, but we can imagine what tinnitus would have very similar aspects here as well. That was just because the slide just disappeared. And then diplocusis, we don't talk as much in the general population about diplocusis, but with musicians, pitch perception issues are career ending, right? If you are a string instrument or singer or anything, any free pitch instrument like that, and you can no longer hear all of the correct pitches, it's impossible. It's impossible to play. It's impossible to hear cues. Harmonies sound weird. Harmonics are off, and this can really throw people off. And what this all comes down to is this one common element, is this grief over the loss of what they used to think of as their greatest gift, their good ear. This was a quote that was said to me by a patient many, many years ago that sticks with me, where they said, at this point, I just had to say goodbye to my good ear. And some of you may be musicians, but you may know that good ear is really one of the best compliments you can give somebody. It's like telling a QB they have a good arm. Uh, Another sports analogy. What is wrong with me? Um, or like an artist, you have a good eye for color, right? A musician saying to another musician, you have a good ear, you have a golden ear, that is an amazing compliment. But then you start wondering if that's true anymore once you develop a hearing loss or tinnitus or hyperacusis or diplocusis or any of these. So a lot of success in music comes from confidence in yourself and in your work. Hearing disorders erode that confidence, and it's tough to maintain that same level of output. We're going to go through this rather rapidly because I want to get into the beef of it here, the meat of it. But there is a higher risk for musicians with music-induced hearing disorders. Variable scale, though, depending on the study that you read. Schenck in 2014 said that there's 4 times greater risk of hearing loss and 50% greater risk of tinnitus. Here's the general population incidence for hearing loss from DiStadio in 2018, showing over a third professional musicians with hearing loss. And that's about 1 in 21 musicians with diplocusis. So remember how important I said that that was for those folks who have it? These numbers are big, right? Distortions in timbre and pitch can be career ending. And if 1 in 21 are dealing with that, that is not a small blip, right? But that variability is huge. And I think part of the variability here, where one group is saying 74%, another saying 38% with hearing loss, is because of this silent issue, which is essentially we are underestimating the rate of injury because of voluntary withdrawal from the music industry, right? We know about all the big rock stars and the uh, folks who leave the music industry who are household names, but they can no longer play the Huey Lewis's and all them. Um, the issue is that most musicians are not household names, and most amateurs and students simply drift away and find something else to do that doesn't hurt their ears and that they can feel confident in. So I believe that these numbers are underestimating. The numbers can be different, but depending on the genre as well. This is a 2018 big review that looked at a lot of different studies, and they found that classical musicians typically have more incidents of diplocusis reported, rock and jazz and pop musicians, more incidents of hyperacusis and hearing loss, pretty much the same in tinnitus. And a lot of that's probably reporting, right? Classical musicians are less likely to report these injuries because of the traditional setting that they're in and um, the competitive setting that they're in. And then symmetry can be different as well, which is interesting because we typically think of noise-induced hearing loss as a symmetric bilateral condition, especially in occupational health settings. But in classical, especially, we have a lot of asymmetry. You can probably think of why, right? Here's an image to show why. A lot of classical instruments are asymmetric in their exposure. Violin is usually on the left side or your non-dominant hand side. That's where the instrument is biased to. Flute's the opposite. So you get the sense that these musicians' primary exposure is actually their own instrument. And I'm going to end this section just by saying one very cheesy thing, which is that I half jokingly call this field of audiology music conservation instead of hearing conservation. And the point here is that our goal is very selfishly to keep the musician playing, to keep them producing the music that we enjoy, right? Their music makes the world a better place, more beautiful place, and we all need more positive things in the world right now. And if you think that this is super cheesy, I want to take it one step further. Think of your favorite artist, the person who you've bought the most records of, that you listen to the most on your streaming platform, Taylor Swift or whoever, James Taylor, it doesn't matter. Imagine if they stopped producing music because of a hearing injury tomorrow. Imagine if they no longer put out any more music. Think of how much joy will be lost in the world, at least to you, but probably to a lot of listeners. This is what matters with every single musician who walks into the door, at least to me. There we go. Little cough there. So here is some practice guidance. This is probably the best one that's available right now. We published this in the before times, just in 2020, right before everything went crazy. This is the clinical consensus document published by AAA. There's the QR code. Please feel free to pull it up. I have the link there as well, which we can throw into the chat. But this document is really short and it's really concise, which I guess is a redundant statement. But it is to the point. How do we practically do this work? So I'm going to touch on just a couple aspects of this to make sure that we can all be on the same page. The first thing that this document actually starts with, and we did this very much on purpose, was to talk about how musicians actually get in through the door. Most musicians call our practice, call audiology offices because a manufacturer who's making their custom ear gear, their inner monitors or earplugs, told them they need to go see an audiologist to get ear mold impressions. So they find an audiologist and they say, hey, cool, look, I found an audiologist. They'll know what to do and how to keep me safe. The problem is that very often, without guidance, when they call that audiology office, we end up saying something like this. Cool, a musician. And they'll know what they need. And what they need, they're saying, I need an ear mold impression because that's all they've been told by the manufacturer. Instead, we really should be using this comprehensive hearing conservation program approach. We'll talk about that in a second. Regardless of their reason for visit, you need earplugs? Cool. That means that you're worried about hearing loss. Let's test your hearing. You need in-ear monitors? Cool. That means you're worried about your hearing loss. Let's test your hearing. Right? It's the same approach no matter what, because it's hearing conservation 101, back to grad school, right? And the clinician here, in this case, the audiologist, can be what we like to call the ambassador, right? The ambassador for healthy hearing. We can bring the concepts of healthy hearing to that person's forefront. Hearing conservation programs, by the way, if you're not already having an allergic reaction to my sense of humor, which is a little bit dulled today by my sinus infection, then you can please join me at the PAA conference in September. I'll be speaking in bucolic, King of Prussia about the topic of occupational health and OSHA and KOC and industrial side of this hearing loss prevention stuff. But the hearing loss conservation program core components are the same, whether we're talking clinically or industrially. First, we measure the sound, make sure we know if they're at risk. We do noise controls, both engineering controls and administrative controls. And clinically speaking, how do we find out these information? Oops. We do a case history, right? We can find out all this information by asking and then, giving them some guidance from there. Clinically speaking, we then do a hearing test. There's some guidance in the AAA document about what needs to be in that hearing test to make sure we're looking appropriately for the results that we need to help that musician. We do hearing protection devices. We'll talk about the details of that in a second. Train them, educate them, motivate them, and evaluate the outcomes. And that is also called follow-up care, right? We actually bring them back and check their hearing again to see if it's changed, to see if the results have strayed from previously, or show that our intervention is actually working. We're going to focus the rest of our time today mostly on two small, nuanced bits of this. We could spend an hour easily on case history. We could spend an hour easily on any of these aspects, but we're going to focus on in-ear monitors, which is one, engineering noise control, and we're going to focus on hearing protection devices or earplugs. These have in common that the ear mold impression is paramount, but we're going to skip over ear mold impressions for now. We can talk about it at the end if anybody has specific questions about ear mold impressions, but we're going to skip that for now and just jump right to hearing protection devices so that we can cover everything we want to in our learning objectives today. So hearing protection devices, we all know them, we all love them. We have specific goals as audiologists. We want to protect somebody's hearing by sticking something in their ear. Musicians have specific different goals. Their priorities may overlap, but they're different, right? And their priorities typically revolve around performance. They're worried about the sound quality. They need a consistent, ideally flat, but consistent and predictable frequency response so they can calibrate themselves to their ears. They need comfort that they can wear for hours and hours without distracting them from their performance, from their artistic expression. They need some protection, but they don't want overprotection, right? Overprotection leads to rejection, is the saying. And we want them to feel like their performance is not being compromised. There's always a compromise when you put something in your ears, but we want that to be limited as little as possible. One of the biggest conversations we have, and we spend a lot of time on this with musicians, is talking about their filter strength. Filters come in lots of different shapes and sizes. I prefer the ones on the bottom there, the edemotic filters. There are smaller ones available. They look the same size on this slide. I should make them smaller. Uh, but they don't have as flat of a response, so they don't typically do as well with professionals. They'll hear the difference and reject them more often. So stick with those edemotic filters. This isn't an advertisement for edemotic, but that's my personal opinion. We need to think about all these things. It's just a quick checklist to think through with the goal of not over attenuating in any certain circumstance. Sometimes I have to fit multiple sets of filters, but primarily we're looking for one set of filter that fits the majority of their circumstances and they can get used to. Okay. You all know edemotic ER filters. Likely you fit these to patients currently or in the past. They're great. They're not 100% flat. We shouldn't be calling them flat, but they're as flat as possible, and they're the flattest ones out there. Um, they work super well. I don't know what else to say about those. We could spend an hour if you want, but we're going to move on to other types too. Universal fit earplugs. I personally like the age-old ER20s. The ER20 XS is the updated version, which sounds even slightly better and is more comfortable. We fit these for musicians constantly, even folks who are getting custom in-ear monitors or custom earplugs. We end up fitting and giving these out as well because it's really nice to have as backup. They're relatively flat. They're much flatter than any other universal fit earplug out there. But there are other options. In fact, there's constantly coming out with new cool options. By last count, there's about 4 dozen that I think are viable and often used. Here's just a few of them, especially the newer ones. We got a loop. The middle one's called a Vibes. Kind of looks like a little drum head or drum mallet. One on the right says it's called curved, kind of the same concept as a looped. They look cool, right? And I love the fact that we're normalizing earplugs. Concert goers especially like these. Just be careful with all the advertising hype that you'll see on the social medias and whatnot. They are not necessarily a lot better than the old Edemotic, the ER20s. They just are more designy and more hip and more trendy. So Whatever the person wants to wear, I'm totally fine with it. In fact, that's an old saying in hearing conservation, which you probably all know. So we'll all yell it out together over our sandwiches and soups. The best hearing protection device is the one that people will wear consistently, right? The one that they'll wear consistently. Sorry, that slide jumped ahead. But you got a preview of where we're going with this, which is one of the key things that matters about hearing protection devices is that they do, in fact, work. I don't want to leave somebody with a false sense of security. I don't want them to have earplugs in their ear that don't fully seal or protect them and think I'm protected and then later come up with a hearing problem because they were not fully protected. So verification is a huge key component to ethical music audiology practice. So, two great ways clinically to do verification. It only takes a couple minutes. I do this every single day that I'm working with patients. The mighty REAT test, the real ear attenuation at threshold. It sounds like a big old bother, but it is as simple as this. First, we test somebody's unprotected hearing thresholds. What do we call that? Hearing test, right? And then we measure their hearing with hearing protection devices in their ears, hearing test with earplugs. The difference is their attenuation. It's as simple as that. The AAA guideline actually has a specific protocol laid out for you to follow. I do a variation of this, but it's laid out for a purpose. You really only need 2 or 3 frequencies. You want to do it in 1 or 2 dB steps. 5 dB steps is not quite enough to get the nuance that we're looking for here. You'll want to use a warble tone or narrowband noise. Do the same thing with the hearing protection devices in place. And then the difference is the attenuation. If you want to download these slides later or take a screenshot, here's just a simple way of charting this out. If you're using multiple frequencies, we're just looking at the unprotected. For those, I'm sort of mathematically impaired, so I like seeing it to understand how all those numbers go together. Here's just an example where you're looking at the unprotected threshold and then the threshold with the hearing protection devices. The difference at each, you average those together, and there's your attenuation. We have a goal in mind. We have an understanding of what we're trying to protect that person down to, and then we see if we actually got there. There's a great question in the chat. Thank you so much. Asking if we're using sound field or hearing or headphones. You read my mind. That's next on my slide deck. So thank you. The $10 is in the mail for being my plant in the audience today. If you are looking for best practice, you would be using sound field with contralateral masking through inserts. That's a lot of work and it takes extra time and it can be confusing. So typically speaking, I just use circumaural earphones. Key word there, circumaural. They need to go around the ear, not over the ear. Supraaural earphones are not applicable here. If it distorts the pinna in any way, then it may change the fit of that earplug in the person's ear. And what's the purpose of testing it then, right? Then you only know how it is with supraaural earphones on. So circumaural earphones, big old Sennheisers or radio ears. Again, try not to say name brands and things here to stay non-commercial, but you know the type that I'm talking about. But sound field if you want to be if you want to get extra cookies, right? That's definitely the best practice. Thanks for the question. There is one other option, less used, but I just want to talk about how to do microphone and real ear or Meyer testing with musicians' earplugs. Here's the protocol that I like to use. This is by my friend Brian Flagger. First, you place the probe, and then you run an MPO sweep at 85. Why 85? Why that loud? Because when we go and measure the person's attenuation, we want a sufficient noise floor sufficient headroom before we hit the noise floor of that VeriFit or whatever system you're using. If you use a quieter signal, when you then plug in that person's hearing protection devices, you may be bottoming out the noise floor and you're getting false data. So 85 is a good guess there. The difference between the MPO with and without the earplugs is obviously what we're looking for. We're looking for consistency. We're looking to maintain that TFOE, right? The transfer function of the outer ear. We're looking to see that this protection is in fact flat across the frequency range. There's obviously downsides to doing Meyer, the biggest one being slit leaks, second biggest one being it takes extra time, but the REIT or the Meyer, both of them work really well. I like having the handout, the printout to be able to say this is what it looks like. Jason, great question. Considering the value to the patient, it really depends on the patient. I like the REIT. I think seeing it on the audiogram, comparing it practically at threshold makes a lot of sense for patients. The Meyer, for those who are very technical, it can be nice because they feel like they're getting like a read of their earplug. That said, the technical limitations of Meyer testing and the uh, sometimes it could take an extra 10 minutes to do, can really wear down the need for that. Great question. For Meyer testing, yes, which stimuli, I usually use an MPO sweep, the beep, 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 right? You can also use white noise, speech. It doesn't really matter, but the MPO sweep then spits out a table of numbers, and that's easy to read, right? Thanks. These are great questions. Thank you, guys. We're going to jump over to in-ear monitors. In-ear monitors are, simply speaking, high-powered earphones that are capable of going super loud and are able to, with their high performance, give the musician what they need on stage. They're able to hear themselves over the background noise of the stage. So they're very fine-tuned, high-powered, high-performance tools. They are not hearing protection devices, though. So we'll get into what I mean by that. To understand why in-ear monitors exist and what they're doing for us, I want to quickly help us understand what the traditional stage looked like. The traditional stage, you still see these all the time. It's wedge monitors. These are speakers that are blowing back at the performer so that they can hear themselves. That increases the stage volume, not just the instruments now on stage, but also an entire separate PA system making sound at them. The reason we have that is because olden times, right? There's the Beatles and Rolling Stones. Uh, when these did not exist or when they were limited, the performers on stage could not hear themselves, right? That's why the Beatles stopped touring because they could not hear themselves, Shea Stadium, right? Now I don't know, it looks like we've just metastasized all over the stage with these boxes. It's hideous, it's horrible, it's so loud. Sorry about that imagery that I just presented. I wish I didn't say that. But this causes a huge problem for the musician because they have this uh, very hostile environment, sound environment that they have on stage. So we can lower those stage volumes in a lot of ways, right? Engineering controls, put blocks around the loudest things. Those can work to a certain extent. You can tip your amps up. These are just a couple stage examples. Those amps tipped up limit how much people are being blasted right in the face. But in-ear monitors is really the key here. So here's a band you all know, their name. It's written in big letters. But notice their stage, no boxes on stage, no speakers, no amps actually for any of the instruments. And what this is what we call a quiet stage or a silent stage, which is all the rage nowadays. I didn't mean that to rhyme, happens all the time. And with silent stages, everybody's wearing in-ear monitors. All the sound sources, except for the drums and the horns and the vocals, are off stage or electronic. So the entire stage is actually the quietest place in the venue. And that allows us to turn down the front of house, meaning the entire audience is getting less sound exposure and the musicians can hear what they're actually doing better. Wow, in-ear monitors are magical, aren't they? They must work for everybody. Unfortunately, in-ear monitors are not hearing protection devices. We've said this before. I'll say it again. Manufacturers will try to turn uh, the musicians into thinking that they are buying ear protection devices, but they're not, right? They're buying high-powered earphones and then blasting those through their ears. So many of you probably know this study from 2008, Fetterman and Ricketts over in um, Nashville. I forgot the word Vanderbilt. That's what a sinus infection will do to you. Studied and said, I won't go into it in full, but essentially, let's get musicians to listen through wedge monitors and listen through in-ear monitors. What level do they prefer? And they preferred basically the same level. What this means is that folks will turn up their in-ear monitors to the same level that they are used to hearing wedge monitors if they aren't properly trained. When properly trained and asked to turn down the sound to the minimum acceptable listening level, they can only turn down the floor monitors by 1.5 decibels, right? 1.8 dB, less than 50% the total outcome, the output, right? That is pretty sad. But with in-ear monitors in place, properly fit ceiling in-ear monitors, they were able to turn down 6 decibels, which going back to acoustics math, that is uh, 4 times less sound output, 4 times less danger, or 4 times more safe listening time at that level. So yes, they're still listening at 104 dBA, which is wild, but it's 4 times safer than 110 dBA. So that is called progress, folks. Progress can look like a lot of different things. What other options do we have with in-ear monitors? And I recommend that whichever in-ear monitor musician is coming in saying that they want to order, you get really familiar with that device. At very, very least, what class of in-ear monitor it falls into. Are they universal fit, which have those little foam or rubber tips? Are they universal fits with a custom sleeve, which increases your attenuation, also increases your price slightly, but it's more economic than a fully customized in-ear monitor. Fully customized in-ear monitors come in two different materials. Most labs only use one or the other. Acrylic is the more common one. You can customize their look. They can look fancier, they can look cooler for a lower price point. However, it's a hard shell, right? Just like a hard shell hearing aid, its seal is going to vary. But unlike a hard shell hearing aid, when that person breaks the seal by opening their mouth and singing or smiling, they're hearing the full stage volume roaring in through their ears. So acrylic is sometimes problematic with that. Sometimes it works perfectly fine. It just depends on the person's ear and depends on what kind of setting they're in. Silicone handles those seals a lot better. There's only a couple labs in the US that do silicone, but they handle the seal a lot better because they have a flexible material in the canal. However, they can more isolate the person from stage in a negative way, right? Too much protection means rejection. And in many cases, we have folks who are now lacking the stage sound that they used to hear. This is where more complicated in-ear monitor systems that have ambience built in. We don't have the time to get into that today, but I'll be happy to chat about that with anybody offline or in a future webinar. I think we have just enough time that I can play for you a brief sample of what in-ear monitors sound like. This is a band that I used to perform with called Osler Circle, playing at World Cafe Live in Philadelphia. I'm going to play for you first what it sounds like through open ears in the venue. Best song in the world. Now we're going to hear what it sounds like through the in-ear monitor mix. Okay, this was actually recorded live at the same time. Here's the mix that the musicians were listening to with about 25 dB of stage isolation. Because the wind is high, it blows my mind. Because the wind... All right. The rest of the webinar is canceled. I just want to listen to the Beatles now. Wouldn't it be nice? I think you guys would probably appreciate that. Anyway, what did we get out of that? The first example, you could hear the room, you can hear everything, it sounds fine, but when you hear it all clean, each voice stands out, each instrument stands out, everything isn't competing with each other anymore. You can write into the chat kind of what your experience was with that sound. Hopefully you heard it loud and clear. I'll play one more example now. It's going to be slightly louder. It's a different band. I warned you, it's going to be slightly louder. So louder band, louder song, cymbals are distorting, everything like that. Now let's listen to what that same exact music sounds like through someone's in-ear monitor mix. A little bit easier to listen to. Kind of sounds like something you could hear on the radio, right? So huge difference. So again, it is subjective, right? It's up to you what you're hearing. But what I hear with that is that's something I could actually play along with and not cringe and not be hurt at the end of the day. So that's the purpose of in-ear monitors. Feeling good? I don't see any notes in the chat or questions, so I'm going to move on. The fitting and orientation of in-ear monitors. Here is a thought that I want to lay out for you. A friend of mine, music audiologist up in Rochester, New York, Brendan Fitzgerald, laid this out, and it kind of changed my thinking about how I approach this topic when teaching, but also, frankly, when fitting, which is when we fit hearing aids, we are clinical audiologists. When we fit hearing aids, we have to think about all these different factors. We don't just have a person call and say, "Hi, I need a pair of whatever, whatever. Here's the money. Take the impression. Please throw them in my ears and mail them to my home." That would be unethical. That would be terrible, right? They might get hurt. They might not get the care that they need. None of that's necessary or allowed. Same thing with monitors. We need to think about the care and the candidacy and evaluate the individual to see if this is even the proper product and fitting device for them. We need to help them with selecting that device if it isn't. We need to actually physically fit and orient them because you know how to fit a hearing aid. We assume the musician knows what to do with that in-ear monitor when it shows up at their door. They don't. They're going to turn it up just like Todd Ricketts and uh, Fetterman said, they're going to turn up that sound to the same level that they've been listening to unless we train them to turn it down. So we need to be there to help them with that. We need to verify those outputs and the results, and we need to follow up and see if they're in fact doing it because we are responsible to that patient, right, for their outcomes. And I think about this image here. I don't have time to tell you the full story, but essentially, this is a 3-year-old whose dad is a Ferrari race car driver for a social media stunt. He put a car seat in the Ferrari and let the kid go around the track at 100 something miles an hour. Um, I have feelings about that. And when we fit in-ear monitors to musicians without even asking what they're wearing or how they're using them, are we kind of doing the same thing, right? Just want to think about that some. So how do we verify in-ear monitors? We can use the REIT that can check the attenuation, certainly. We can use a Meyer test, microphone and real ear, Verifit, or real ear verification. Sorry, I keep saying Verifit. That would check the attenuation, of course, like we talked about. You can also check the output of that in-ear monitor in the person's ear and help them understand better what their output is. We can use a sound level meter to check their exposure, their on-stage exposure. There are a couple devices available, and again, this is a not commercial talk, but there's only a few devices out there, so I'm going to show you both of them. Uh, Sensophonics makes something called a DB check, and Audix, which is a professional microphone company, makes something called a in-ear monitor analyzer. Here's what they look like in practice. The DB check allows you to check both the output of the in-ear monitor that the person is currently wearing and also the room exposure, the room sound. The Audix is essentially a fancy microphone attached to what we all look at and say that looks like an ear coupler, right? I believe it's a 1.5 cc coupler, and that's it. So it's not that foreign to us audiologists, is it? When we're following up with in-ear monitors after we fit them, this is sort of my checklist. You can use it for free. The image isn't mine, so I don't know who you can reference for that. But basically, we're going to check their fit and their seal. We're going to assess their attenuation, make sure that it's giving them the seal that they need for their purposes. Talk about their output levels, monitor their hearing, do another hearing test, and assess any barriers to their safe use, right? Is there anything that's stopping you from using these at a quieter level? All right. We have about 10 minutes left. I do have some more details to get to make sure that we cover everything, and then we'll jump into questions at the very end. So I want to talk briefly about some music audiology settings. In music audiology, I find myself mostly doing mobile services. You can come and see me at my office, but I most of the time I'm actually out traveling and working at people's venues, rehearsal spaces, residences, festivals. It's nice because we get to meet people when and where they are, right? Their atypical hours and spaces. I could talk for another hour about etiquette when you're in these spaces and how to not fall into some of the pitfalls that I've fallen into, learning how to navigate these spaces and be a guest in their space while at the same time holding yourself as an expert and not as some kind of a fan or uh, a VIP trying to get extra services or favors. So a couple of spaces that I find myself in, that's Rock Lidditz over in and Lidditz. I know this is a Pennsylvania crowd, so I threw in a couple pictures. But it's not always glamorous, right? This is a van in a muddy parking lot in Vermont that I found myself in once because of some urgent need. It took 5 hours to get there for me, and then I found myself there, and there was a rainstorm and a lightning storm. The show was canceled, and so we had to do everything in the van. Couldn't get hearing testing done that day because of the pouring rain. So, it's not always glamorous. Speaking of not glamorous, we also do a lot of teleaudiology, and I want to introduce you guys to a service that, again, not a this is not a sales thing. I don't work for them, but I do see patients on this platform called Tuned. I've been working with Music Cares, which is Recording Academy, or the Grammy folks, also known as, for about 10, 12 years now. And about 3 years ago, we partnered up with Tuned to create a teleplatform to service musicians during the heights of the pandemic. The program stuck around because it turns out it's their most popular service program of all time. So what we do well, what Music Cares does is they do health and social services, primarily doing things like addiction recovery, mental health access, dental access. Hearing is one of those aspects. So what we do with them is we bring them in for a 1 hour telehealth visit that's fully paid for. There is a thorough questionnaires. We do tinnitus questionnaires, hearing health questionnaires ahead of time, and then a thorough hearing screening as well. That's all done online. We interpret those results, and half the time I'm referring that person, no matter where they are in the country or in the world, referring them out to local audiologist to get further hearing testing if they have hearing problems, ear mold impressions if they need custom ear gear. But most of that time is just spent on education. Just by the numbers, we're actually up to about 1,500 consults performed over the last 3 years now. And I just want to point out something here with the data that 36% of the people who sign up for this telehealth services, so people who actually care and are seeking care, have never had a audiologic exam before. I believe that number is higher in the overall industry, but these are professionals who have been working at least 5 years to be eligible for the service in the music industry and have never, ever seen an audiologist or never had their hearing tested. So this is the barrier that we're trying to access, right? We're trying to get over that so that folks can actually get help. And what are their priorities? The vast majority of them, it's to protect themselves. There's only a few of them who come in there with disorders, with tinnitus, hyperacusis, hearing loss, and who want that assessed. The primary reason is for prevention. People care about prevention so much in the industry. This is just a funny image, so we can move on to the next section. And the last thing we're going to talk about today is some global initiatives for hearing wellness and some networks that you can refer to. You can certainly refer people over to Music Cares. I can share the information for that. But I just want to share some new things that are going on. We all know about WHO and the Make Listening Safe campaign. They also have some other initiatives that you might interact with every day and you don't know about. The ITU is the Global Standards for Safe Listening. This brought about a study that showed that we should really be doing on dosimetry for individuals in their own devices. Do these screens look familiar to anybody? What does that look like to you? That's because Apple got really interested in this, and the Michigan Apple study, hearing study, is based directly off of these results. In fact, it's essentially the same people. Rick Neitzel in Michigan and some other folks from National Hearing Conservation Association put this together. So we are all living in a more hearing healthy, hearing conscious world because of this work that the WHO is putting together. You can look all these standards up in your own time. It's amazing how much work has been done out there. Here's another one. This is a huge windfall for the industry. It's called HELA, which is a great name for it. It's a Healthy Ears Limited Annoyance Certification. It was just launched this last spring, and it is a self-guided education and certification for anyone in the music industry. Audiologists, you can sign up for this as well. I believe it's $5, right, to take it and to take the certification. It is made to be accessible. It is amazing. A couple other ones, the Nighttime Industries Association and the World Health Organization teamed up to do the Listen for Life. This is in Europe, but I believe it's coming over to the US very, very soon. And here's a US-based initiative called Ear Aware that is working on promoting hearing health in festivals and music venues. So there's a lot going on trying to make this more of a public awareness, public health initiative. In my final minutes here, I want to talk about some referral networks. There is the biggest one, and again, this is not a advertisement for either of these, but Sensophonics Find an Audiologist list is probably the biggest accessible point. And just asked if I can share my slides. I'll be happy to. I'll share it with PAA and they can pass it out. I believe that's permissible. But Sensophonics' website, Sensophonics is run by Michael Santucci, audiologist, and it's probably the most respected and well used referral list in the industry. You can also get the Gold Circle Masterclass now is available on demand online, and that just makes it more accessible. Nobody has to fly out to Chicago anymore. You can, but you don't need to. Saves you a lot of money. JH Audio is another in-ear monitor company. They have a great preferred audiologist network that you can look up. You can even reach out to them and have your practice added to the list if you're not already on it. I personally am about to launch a music audiology providers network called DMAP. Get it? It's the directory of those audiologists, those few audiologists who primarily and almost exclusively see musicians. Currently, we have most of the country covered, but I'm still working on covering some of the corners and middles of the country to make sure that we have somebody so that touring professionals know where they can go. This is coming soon. It's literally almost was released last week and then it got held up. So if I may, I'm just going to pull out some clinical points just to wrap up. When you do see musicians, musicians are patients just like any other patient. Please, please don't offer them hearing or ear mold impressions without hearing testing. Hearing testing is wanted by this population. I've never offered a hearing test to a musician and been denied it. However, you may have to get creative with how you do this. Consider one option, which is bundling an air conduction screening along with your earplug fitting or your uh, um, ear mold impression fitting. I know it takes a little bit of extra time, but this is the keystone, if you will, to hearing conservation and hearing loss prevention. Also, try to be flexible, meet them where and when they are, right? Offering a 7 a.m. appointment is not going to be viable for this population. They really do care, but we have to be flexible to meet them where they are. If you are fitting devices in your monitors, know about the device, know its output levels, know what the person's going to be using them for. It is irresponsible of us. I'm not going to go as far as to say unethical, but some audiologists are pointing out that it's just going to take a couple lawsuits for us to have some audiologists sued over hearing losses caused by in-ear monitors that they fit, quote unquote, by doing ear mole impressions and having that person eventually have hearing injury from that. So let's be on the good side of that. That brings us to trusting, but always verifying what you're fitting. Please never tell musicians to stop playing music. That is a great way to throw them into a mental health spiral and bring them into existential crisis about who am I anymore. Finally, we always educate, right? Whitney Houston said that children are our future and we got to teach them well. So we got to believe her because she is right about most things. So educate, educate, educate. And then finally, when in doubt, you can reach out to somebody who is identifying as a music audiologist or works primarily in this industry. More experience in a subspecialty means that you know how to deal with the nuanced cases that come along. So if you're unsure of a case, uh, please, please, please reach out and or refer out if you're uncomfortable with the case. Okay. All right, that's what I've got here. I appreciate you guys. This is my email address right there. If you're in Philadelphia, come by and say hi. If you're coming by to the conference, I'll see you there in beautiful, bucolic King of Prussia. All right, I believe I just made it under time, which is great because I'm moving in slow motion today due to Dayquil. But let me read through and see if there's any questions in the chat. If you want to hang out with me for a little bit longer, I'm happy to. If you have to head out, thank you all so much. Thank you, Gail. Anna asked if I can share my slides. Be happy to. Um, Lucy asked, love to see a script on how the front desk can answer the ear mold impression only request. Ooh, that's fun. Um, Happy to chat with you offline about that because it's a very interesting consideration, certainly. Hey, Jason, see you at PAA. Appreciate you.
And I just want to say thank you to you, Frank, for joining us today for such an insightful presentation.
Well, thanks.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you enjoyed this session, don't miss another great session on music audiology at the 2025 PAA conference happening in King of Prussia on September 10th and 12th. That'll be Tools for Teaching Awareness from the Intersection of Music, Audio, and Audiology by Benj Cantors. So be sure to check out the full conference program and register for the event. We would love to see everybody there.